The People Performance Competency Assessment, inspired by Richardboyatzis.
Hi everyone, I am Chin Yi.
And this is Srinidhi SK. We are taking you through a very interesting story, sort of a story about people performance competencies.
Wow.
Yeah. So when you say people performance competency, so what is a competency or a capability? It is nothing but a behavior or a set of behaviors that describes excellent performance in a particular work situation or a work context.
It is an underlying characteristics of a person which enables him or her to deliver superior performance in a given job, role, or a situation.
Absolutely. Well said. So now, if you look at performance competencies, they consist of, it's a cluster of knowledge, which all knowledge. Then, of course, the skill, what I'm able to do.
And the personal attributes that influence an individual ability to perform.
Oh, yes.
Right?
So that means you put together knowledge, skills, abilities, characteristics, all of them together, 1, 2, 3, 4, is an individual's ability to perform at a job well, or if he doesn't have it, not well.
Right.
Yeah. Now, we have a lot of research done in the field of competencies, and let me give you a few important dynamics. In fact, one of those researchers was Hayes, and he published a paper in 1979. And he says that competencies are nothing but generic knowledge, a motive, a trait, a social role, or a skill of a person linked to a superior performance on the job. Yeah? And yet another research, yet another definition of competency was given by Albanese. Yes, Albanese. So in 1989, he published a paper and he says that competencies are nothing but personal characteristics that contribute to effective managerial performance, effective leadership performance. Right? Very critical. Competency can actually be linked to an iceberg model. Yeah.
Okay, so example like an iceberg,
Yes.
which is you see it in the sea when it travel in the sea where the tip of the ice can be seen above the water level.
Yes.
So that's what we call the iceberg. The Titanic got into an accident because of the iceberg, right? It knocked onto the iceberg. Yeah.
Correct.
So the tip of the iceberg, when we relate that to competency, it's you can relatively compare that and look at it like a skill and knowledge of an individual.
No, absolutely.
I
think you said it very well. See, when you look at skill and knowledge of a person, and she said the iceberg, so that is the iceberg that is visible above the waterline.
Yes.
Correct. So the skill and knowledge are easily visible. That's exactly what she is telling us. But what is not visible, what is hidden deep inside the waters, deep inside the person's mind, is the self-image. What image I carry about myself, about me.
Yeah.
Self-image.
And his behavior, his characteristics, which is what we call the traits.
The traits, yes.
And his motivation, the individual's motivations or motive to do a job, to do something or not to do something.
Yeah, it's the inner motive or the inner drive, what do you call it?
Right.
So a lot of it is actually hidden. So now that is where, when you want to identify an iceberg, iceberg-like competency, it is not going to be easy. So what happens if you really look at it in the real world? At the tip are like the skill and knowledge or the technical competencies. The portion above the waterline that is clearly visible and therefore easier to assess.
Yeah, this is where we see that during a lot of interviews.
Yes.
Or even during the feedback sessions, between the manager and his team members. It's very easy for them to cover the technical aspects or the knowledge, the way they, the ability of performing a job. It's visible, easily to discuss during appraisals and
absolutely.
interviews.
See, what happens is most of the recruitment or selection processes, right, or even when we do performance appraisal, people largely depend on skill and knowledge, because if I can always test your skill, I can give you a skill test,
Right.
whether it is driving or working on a computer software,
Right.
correct, or operating a machinery. The skill tests are easier, right, and to assess. At the same time, about knowledge, I can always ask you questions to understand whether you know the subject, you don't know the subject. So skill and knowledge are easier to assess, and that is why a lot of people heavily dependent on those things. But what people increasingly find it difficult is they ask people about the skill and the knowledge, and then either they make a hiring decision or a decision to promote somebody or put them in different key roles and responsibilities, but without understanding what is the person's self-image, the trait, or the motive. Absolutely.
Are there attitudes? Because skill and knowledge is easier to train, right?
Yeah.
Even if they do not know, it's easy to train them.
Yes.
Right? But the attitude of an individual which is underneath the waterline.
Yes.
Underneath the waterline, which is their behavior, right? It's much more difficult to correct them when you hire them.
Absolutely. You said it. Behavioral competencies are harder to develop for the simple reason they are part of the iceberg below the water.
It's difficult.
It is not even easy
to
absolutely not easy to look into, not easy to assess. So you need highly sophisticated assessment tools, right, to accurately bring out a true picture of an individual's behavioral competencies.
Right. So then when we talk about the behavioral competencies, it's easy to understand that it is the manifestations of how a person sees themselves, right, which is what we call the self-image. Srinidhi has covered that. And how he or she typically behave.
The traits.
The traits, yes. Or what motivates him or her.
So now let's look at, for example.
So what do you mean by skill? How do we identify what's a skill?
That's a good question. Right, for the benefit of understanding what a skill is, you can always look at a person's ability to do something well. For example, you could be good in cooking or tailoring, you're driving, or
doing his typing, or even in accounting, right? Accuracy, and he knows the subjects of accounting.
Or playing a game like badminton, table tennis, So that's where the skill sets are.
And knowledge?
Knowledge is, about, learning, about knowing more. Information that a person uses in a particular area. For example, this might differentiate an outstanding customer service person who speaks many, many languages from his or her average counterpart with an international clientele. So you look at it, with an international clientele, you need somebody with a lot of information, ability to speak in multiple languages. Somebody else who cannot do that, their knowledge is found, there's a shortcoming.
Right.
Yeah.
So some people would have a knowledge to do, who have a lot of knowledge, they read a lot, but they might not have the ability to apply the knowledge, right? So here we are also looking at the applications of their knowledge.
True. The self-image, when it comes to, it is a person's view of him or herself. Identity. It's an identity. What identity I carry about myself in my mind, a personality and my self-worth. For example, seeing oneself as a leader or as a developer of people, right? So this is what the image that I have about myself. Yeah.
Right, so the traits is usually a behavior that we can identify. And we use the traits, things like, he's such a good listener, right?
True.
And he's such a great communicator. He has the ability to influence or convince someone. That's the trait.
And the
right?
motive?
Or charm someone.
And the motive?
Motive is nothing but the drive of someone's behavior, which is his motivations.
Right.
What motivates him? Maybe someone is motivated to become an expert. Either I want to be a technical expert, or an expert, or I want to be someone? What's the motivations behind an action?
See, when we say motivation is again I'm motivated for three things. One is achievement. Second one is affiliation. I want to get affiliated to different people or different projects. Or power. I want to hold power. So achievement, affiliation, and power are the motives why people do what they do. Right? And that's where the entire dimension. But I must tell you something. We have been talking so much about competencies. We have to bring in human work done by some very well-known scientists in the field of competency development.
And one of them is definitely Richardboyatzis.
Richardboyatzis, tell me about it. What a great personality.
Yeah, he's a professor on organizational behavior. He has done a lot of work on that and work on emotional intelligence, behavioral change, competency, leadership.
Yes.
Right. He's also author of books, right? Like the Resonate Leadership.
Resonant Leadership, yes. And he also wrote one more on Resonant Leader.
Yeah.
There are two books, one on leader, one on leadership.
Right.
And there's one more he wrote on primal leadership. Yeah. So why are we mentioning Richardboyatzis? We are mentioning because he gave us a model. The model is, he says this is very important for competency mapping, right? Because when you say competency mapping, let's understand that first before we go into his model, right? The competency mapping is nothing but competencies required to perform a given job or a role successfully. Yeah. So which means
the technical competencies, you need to look at the behavioral requirement to do a job. Example, what is behavioral here? Important, because imagine if I need someone to work in a field, sales in field. So the behavior of the individual is he should not want things in his comfort manner. He should have the will to push things. That's a behavioral competency that we are covering.
Then ability to manage situations and people brings in managerial competencies. And of course, attitude is there at the core of everything. So whole lot of competencies are required for somebody to be very effective on the job. Right.
But that's not all. He said it's important that you need to map it.
Correct.
Yeah, and put all different things together. And that's where when he spoke about mapping in his model, he said it's important for you to look at, it's not only looking at the individual's competence, what the individual is able to do or not to do, or what he's good at in his capability, but you need to look at the individual and the job demands.
Absolutely.
Okay, the demand of the job. Like the example that I gave, if I'm looking at someone, a sales individual in a marketplace, and that marketplace is very tough, right, and require them to probably to grow the market, right. So I need to look at an individual not only whether he's good in sales or not, right, but I need to look the demand of the person in such a difficult territory, and to grow the market is I need to map it, right. The competence. It's not about the sales skill.
See, when we talk about effective performance, what we have discussed so far, like Chini just now said, individual competence is important for effective performance.
Yes.
Job demands is equally important, brings in yet another dimension to make the performance effective. But there is a third dimension, which is what Boyatzis spoke about. He says organizational environment is also critical. So it means you need to look at three things: individual competence, job demands, and organizational environment. So let's look at job demands.
Right. The job demands are things that, of course, we all know that, right? Planning, organizing, coordinating, controlling, the ability to control, to take charge. And of course, when you're working with people or customers, you need to have the ability to
motivate and inspire.
And inspire them. And right now, with this virtual and diverse in terms of cultures, when in globalization is going on. There's one more that is also very important in organization, which is the collaboration. Collaboration.
Right, you talk about collaboration. Without collaboration, nothing happens.
Right.
So that they are the job demands. Right now, when you look at going by the Boyatzis model, organizational environment, there is the climate and the culture. So every organization has its own culture, very peculiar to that organization. So organizational culture, we call it. There is also based on the situational dynamics, right? Because the environment is very dynamic. So the climate also keeps changing, right? So for example, if the order books are full in an organization, the climate is one of rush. They have to, so many orders to attend to, right? They need to satisfy customers, a lot of the activity. Imagine the order books are empty, right? But then the climate in that company is going to be very different. So the climate can change, and that climate and culture is going to impact effective performance. And add to that is the role and function in which you and me are placed. And not to mention or not to forget management's characteristics, right?
The management characteristics could be higher up, but it could also be the manager, because the managers it's part of the management, right? The characteristics of the managers, all the management will create the environment. It's part of the organizational environment.
Absolutely. That's why, people famous saying is people don't leave companies, they leave bosses.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about a manager's competency or the management's competence.
Right.
Yeah. So now that brings us to individual competence. So when you look at individual competence, definitely, as we spoke earlier, we are talking about the skills and abilities. Right? And when you said characteristics, we are talking about the personality traits and personality motives, right? The inner drives. And most importantly, levels of application, which means you may be having the potential, you may be having the skill, you may be having the knowledge, you may know how to do it, but you may not be using that. Which means you may not be applying what you know. Which means it is not about being competent. It is about using your competence to make things happen. If the application is not there, that's why competency is about level of application.
Yeah. And Boyatzis here in his model mentioned that you cannot look at each one of this as isolation. You cannot look at them isolated. You need to put them together. And then look at it. And this is what competency mapping is about.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think you said it.
Thank you. You're praising me.
Why not? See, now that we have spoken about the model by Richardboyatzis, let me introduce yet another very illustrious personality with respect to competency, David McClelland. David McClelland, just for your information, was a Harvard psychologist, and he is considered even to this day pioneer of the competency movement. What he said is very important to you, and you'll be very happy to hear this. Why? Because he says your job success, your ability to succeed in your job,
is it depending on your intelligence?
No.
No?
It has got nothing to do with my intelligence, nothing to do with my past achievement.
No?
No.
What about my report card?
Your report card, you put it aside. You see, what David McClelland says is, if you have developed your competency based on your potential, right, I am telling you, you can be very competent. That is why you're seeing people who are very less qualified, probably school dropouts, have succeeded tremendously in their life, and against somebody who's very highly qualified, have really not done so well in their own life or career. So which will tell you, so when we talk about competency, which is very important for us to know, it is not just your intelligence. So you don't measure competency by somebody's report card. Right? How intelligent or unintelligent person is, or what is his ability to achieve, what is his past record. So competency is driven by your genetics. Competency is driven by your traits, your motives, right? So your, individual self-image.
And how well we have developed and applied over the years.
Absolutely.
So I'm so excited, because the thing is, whether I have passed the exam or not, that every one of us or any one of us will have a chance to develop our competencies.
And that's the way to go forward.
To get your competency development profile and comprehensive report for job role change, promotion, or recruitment, reach out to OMI and ask for the PPC 20. Certification opportunity now open.